What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today, or I guess yesterday by the time you see this video, Treyarch has finally kind of added a combat record to Black Ops 4. Now what I mean by kind of is it's not actually in the game, but it's in the companion app that you can get on a mobile device. So today I just wanted to share my thoughts on this whole thing because I do have a few things I wanted to say about this. So the first thing to mention is just how long it took them to implement something like this, even in this capacity, within the companion app on mobile devices. Way back, right around the time the game launched, it was shortly after the game launched, Treyarch mentioned on Reddit that they would have combat records within a week, and that just didn't happen. And they also mentioned leaderboards in there, which we still don't have, and it doesn't look like we will be having leaderboards. So the first thing I want to mention is that's really frustrating that they specifically stated, we will have this next week for you, and then nothing happened. We didn't even get a post about it at the time saying, hey, I know that we said we were going to do this, but it's been delayed for whatever reason, or we've decided not to do it. They were just silent on it until I think about a month ago, Vonderhaar tweeted and said he will have an answer for this coming soon. But then even after that, it took an entire month before they acknowledged anything beyond that. So first up, I gotta say that was extremely unprofessional in my opinion. If you say something is going to happen to the community and you aren't able to deliver on that, or you decide not to deliver on that, at the very least, I feel like they kind of owed us an explanation at the time or shortly after the time when they said that the combat records would be coming and then they didn't. Because when you just stay silent on issues like that, when people have been continually bringing this up within the community over the past 6 months or so, or 5 months, then it really starts to give the impression that you don't respect or care about your player base. So that was the first point I wanted to cover, but now let's get into the actual combat records themselves as well as the leaderboards. Now I do want to start this off by stating that I'm not the type of player that cares all that much about combat records or leaderboards. I love them as features, and I think they should be a staple in every single Call of Duty game, and I do enjoy it when they have really detailed combat records where you can look at the specific stats with every weapon and piece of equipment and the heat maps and everything along those lines. I really like that, and it's a great feature that, like I said, I feel should be a staple in every Call of Duty game. But at the same time, if I'm being completely honest, not having a combat record doesn't completely destroy my experience with the game. I'm not the type of player that derives my enjoyment from the game through that combat record or the leaderboards. Having said this, I do recognize the fact that there are a ton of players out there that do specifically play for stats or for leaderboard rankings. It's actually a really big deal for a lot of people to be tracking all these stats, and they pay really close attention to that. They're constantly checking up on that kind of thing. Or there's those players that are specifically trying to climb the leaderboard. They want to be like the top 1,000 in the world, or top 100 in the world, or maybe even number 1 in the world at something. And if you don't have these detailed combat records or leaderboards, then a lot of those people that would otherwise be spending a ridiculous amount of time playing the game, they're not really playing it, or they're not playing it nearly as often. Now on the other end of this, when it comes to combat records, a lot of really casual players especially, they don't want their stats to be publicly visible. They don't want to be bugged or bullied for having a low KD or something like that, and they just don't want that information to be publicly visible. And I also get that side of it. I think if you want to hide like a detailed combat record about yourself and your stats, then that's totally fine, and I think that should be an option. However, I do think it is very important to at the very least have some detailed personal combat records so you can check up on your own stats and you can work towards certain goals within those stats if that's the type of player that you are. Now, when it comes to leaderboards, I can see why they probably don't want to have leaderboards, or they're hesitant to add leaderboards to the game, because traditional leaderboards that we've seen in Call of Duty will give you a pretty good indication of how many people are actively playing the game. Not necessarily concurrently, but just as an example, in CoD World War II, you could see how many people had logged in and played at least one game within the past week. And if you look at that number, that gives you a good indication of how many people are still actively playing the game on your platform. So on the business side of things, when it comes to investors and all of that kind of stuff, there's not much of an upside for Activision to be releasing that kind of information. That's why we no longer see player counts, whereas we used to see them way back in the day with Call of Duty, because there's no upside. If that player count happens to dip and it drops below the expectations, then that will have a negative effect on the company. And therefore, I can't really blame them for wanting to hide that information. But at the same time, there's many different ways that you can work around this to not reveal your player count or your active player base while still having leaderboards for those people that really care about climbing the leaderboards. So one option would be simply limit the number of people that show up on the all-time leaderboards. So let's just say for the all-time leaderboards, just limit it to the top 500,000 players that play the game. Generally, the players that would care about leaderboards and climbing those leaderboards, they're going to be within the top 500,000. And therefore, that would still allow them to climb that ladder, and it would get them to invest a ton of extra time into the game. Another option just off the top of my head is a percentile system. So instead of telling you your exact rank overall compared to everybody else and seeing everybody else's stats and everything, you could at least just show that you are in the top 5% of players in this particular area that you're filtering for, or top 1%, or 0.01%, or something like that. Something like that, while it would be vague and it wouldn't be ideal for a lot of players, it would still give a lot of those leaderboard grinders something to work towards. Like if they're in the top 5%, they might want to grind to get to the top 1%. If they're in the top 1%, they may want to try and grind and get to the top 0.1%. But those are just a couple of really simple solutions that won't reveal your player count, and it will get a lot of people to invest a lot more time in your game. And this is once again another area where if you take a step back and look at it, I'm just scratching my head and I'm thinking like, what are you guys doing here? There is so much potential here to improve player retention throughout the year, which I feel should be the goal, especially when you're focusing so heavily on microtransactions. The more people that you're actively keeping around your game and that are actively enjoying your game and playing it a lot, the more likely you are to sell them microtransactions. If you push these players away or you don't give them a reason to stick to your game, then why would they buy any microtransactions from you? It seems like a no-brainer when it comes to combat records, leaderboards, also things like daily and weekly challenges, which I've been pushing for a really long time now. These things, in my opinion, should be a staple of every Call of Duty game because they heavily contribute to player retention. It just makes no sense to me that they decide to cut these features or they decide to add them 6 months down the road to try and recapture some of the people that they've already lost. Why not have these things in there from day one to keep people around throughout the entire year? Now, when it comes to that update to the companion app that we got, where we now have that detailed combat record that we can access only on our mobile devices, it's not actually accessible in-game, I will give them credit there. They did do a pretty good job of giving some pretty detailed stats. Not quite as detailed as Black Ops 1's combat record, for instance, but it's pretty good. So I will give them credit there, even though it is far too late. Their communication on this issue has been terrible. And I also feel that this should be something that you can access in the actual game itself. It would be nice as a feature to also be able to check it on the mobile device, but I really don't think that should be the only place that you can see this kind of stuff. But I guess that's pretty much where I wanted to end today's video. I think those are all the things I wanted to get out. I'm still blown away by the fact that it took them this long, their communication was so bad, and it seems like they are just missing out on so many of these opportunities to improve their player retention throughout the year, and I just don't get what they're doing and what their mindset is here. But of course, I'd like to know in the comment section below, what are your thoughts on all of this? Are you like me, where combat records don't really make the difference between whether or not you're going to play the game? Or are you somebody that does really like to grind for combat records or for leaderboards, and do those things actually keep you playing the game longer and really investing a lot more of your time into it? Just let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.